very cool and not a lot.
Yes, it is. Hi. Hello. Very true.
He built my house, planted it like a judge.
Oh,
1 foot on setback.
okay.
And I used to be able to go all my furnace and everything was next door. But unfortunately, the lot's been sold and the house has been built, so I can no longer,
Yeah, that doesn't work.
take advantage. Well, vast amounts of the tumbles and leaves came today.
Hey, Susie.
Gee, that's a popular name tonight.
Yes. I got the first one today, huh? Susie.
Is
We
that too
have
loud?
some literature here. We have information about the library summer programs, and also Suzanne has brought some emergency planning materials. So how would you say?
I surprised myself when I talked and could hear myself. Is that too loud or is that okay? You guys okay with?
I think it's good with the fans, probably. Do you want me to cut it down 1 notch or 1
Sounds
notch?
a little echoey to me.
Okay.
Did you one check your evacuation? Zone discovered
How's that? Is that better? Okay. Sounds good. Doing much better than me. As long as you guys are good. I could probably even, do I have to have it on? Can you guys hear me without it or do you need it for the recording?
Yeah, recording.
It gives closed caption on the recording, which a lot of people like. They
Okay.
can hear it better. I would just say with the fans, you probably need to keep it. With the fans, you may need to keep it on.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, it's definitely much better. I'm not echoing in my own ear. Hi, John.
Okay. 6:30. I have like 3 people online, so yeah.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Lancaster Community Library. And we're really excited tonight to start our summer series, A Special Evening With. And this evening it is Suzanne Novak doing emergency preparedness. I would like to highlight a couple of upcoming programs and then let Suzanne take it away. So our summer series, as some of you may know, the theme is Color Our World. We have programs and activities for all ages. I'll focus tonight on the programs for adults. We do have book groups going on the third Monday and the third Wednesdays. We have an LCL and Stitches group Monday evenings. We have Mahjong Wright-Patterson on Friday afternoons. And our next special evening with program features Deborah Levin. She is a nurse practitioner and she will be speaking about diabetes prevention. So I invite you all to come to all of these programs. Almost everything the library does is free of charge, thanks to the support of people just like you, as well as our local government and many, many grants for the summer, including Grace Episcopal Church Outreach Committee, the Wiley Foundation, and the River Counties Community Foundation. So, Suzanne, thank you. Take it away.
Thank you, Alice. So hi, everyone. A little bit about me. As you saw in the flyer, the announcement, I am a former FEMA disaster assistance employee with a reservist. What that means is that there's a number of folks that are out there. I was a reservist from 2005 to 2012. So I had my own business, I still do. You deploy when you're needed, and the commitment from a FEMA reservist is that you're willing to go within 24 to 48 hours anywhere that they need you to go for a minimum of 30 days, and that you also, it's the type of position where you only get paid when you deploy. So that's why there's a lot of people that have businesses, or they're retired, or they have expertise in some form of disaster response or emergency management. Sometimes firefighters, public works. My position was as a public information officer. So on a professional background, I've had 30-some years in business, in everything from business operations, technology, marketing, PR, and sort of the full span of business, which is what led me to have with my company. When I stopped being a reservist, I was in Connecticut at the time actually, and we started supporting national level exercises to help communities come together. And so that's where a lot of the information that you have there is from ready.gov. They have a great website with a number of different things like the different checklists. They have resources for communities. And I've spent a lot of my time with communities helping them be better prepared. So you hear a lot about resilience. We're hearing a lot about emergency management is shifting now. And in some ways it is, in some ways it has always been. You hear disasters are local, right? And so the response needs to be local. The more you are prepared as an individual, the better off you are, and the better off the community is. And so what I want to make sure is this, you guys stop me, and I say guys because I'm originally from Connecticut, so I'll apologize up front. But if there's anything you want to know about, things that aren't covered, please let's make this as interactive as possible. And so raise your hands for questions or call out, whatever. We'll start off with, any of you, have you been through any of the disasters here locally? Have you lived here where we've had the hurricanes or the tornadoes? No?
Yeah.
Yes? All right, so let's talk about, well, actually, one other question. Is there anything you already know about emergency preparedness? Do you have any comfort level, or where do you think you're at? A little bit? Not?
Well, I've been lately trying to keep alive on hand 2 extra gallons of water, especially if hurricane season come up and all that. I know about water contamination and everything else.
Anybody else do that? Anybody have supplies already? Yeah? Okay. So let's talk about emergency preparedness and what are some of the typical emergencies. So I categorize these in really 2 different types of, there's the natural disasters, right? So we were talking about the storms, hurricanes, wild weather, flooding, all of those things that are storm related, earthquakes, and then tornadoes. And earthquakes, as you all familiar with the earthquakes that have happened in Virginia? No? So they do happen, not so much over here, but that's something that does happen in Virginia, which is why I put it on there. And then the tornadoes, the last tornado that we had was Callio, probably 6 months ago, something like that. And prior to that, I think, was Hurricane Michael, when the tornado came through and it made landfall right down by Windmill Point and went all the way up to the winery. If y'all might remember that it took off the roof of the winery. So it had a track of about 3 miles. One of the things that my company does is we provide drone services and drone flight school. So we actually had a local drone pilot from Hinsdale, and Jamie came down and worked with Lancaster County, and we flew the path of the tornado so we could help, to figure out where the entry point was and where the end point was and the destruction in between. So there's a lot of things communities do that you may not see or you may not be involved with, but communities like ours, we've done a really good job in Lancaster County of preparing, training people. We have a strong CERT program. Are you all aware of CERT? So CERT is Community Emergency Response Teams, and ours, every CERT program, depending on the community, depending on the county or the state, they have different missions. Ours you see out a lot in events. They helped a lot with COVID when we had set up the mobile vaccine locations, and they're out there here at the park. They've been here helping to direct traffic for certain events. So great resource. You see them at the carnival. They're out at different events recruiting people. If you have an interest in getting involved, you don't have to have special skills. They have a lot of training, so it's one way to get involved and learn more yourself. So the other set of incidents, an act of violence, the act of violence could be anything from the active shooter, it could be a terrorist incident. Sometimes you see the domestic violence, sometimes that rolls over into public space. All of those things are things that you at least need to be aware of and prepare for in a variety of ways. And then the other thing is the intentional act of business disruption. So that could be something, heard of insider threat? Have you all heard of an insider threat? Is that a term you know? No, so insider threat are things like if here we don't have as many obviously large employers, but oftentimes it's a concern for companies whether it's a insider threat that affects the IT system. So someone that might be maybe a disgruntled employee and they're going to leave, they have access to the IT system so they can do something before they go to shut down systems. It could be an insider threat, could be someone that has access to finances or personnel records, or sometimes you hear about embezzlement, right, from companies. That's an insider threat because it's usually somebody inside that causes that to occur, right? Other insider threats could also be something like bullying in a sense of an employee. There might be some differences of opinion, of philosophy, et cetera, that kind of boils up in a company. That's also another type of insider threat, and that's why I put it as broad as I did of something that it's an intentional disruption of business, because also the domestic violence falls in there, and an active shooter could also fall in there if it's somebody that's, you heard, do you remember the situation in Virginia Beach a few years ago? Anybody aware of that? Active shooter, no? So it was an employee that was upset. They were in a public works position. They left, they came back into the building, and they ended up shooting a number of people, and there was, I think, one death. I don't remember the exact details, but that was an insider threat because it was someone that worked for the city of Virginia Beach. And the repercussions of something like that, you have to think about, and this isn't so much individual preparedness, but if you are a small business owner or even in the community, you think about it, some of the mental health parts that go along with that, the employees didn't want to go back into that building. So there becomes challenges of what if something does happen? What is your alternative plan? So on the business side, I talk a lot about business continuity and those challenging questions. What are companies going to do, large or small, for their employees? Have they thought through those critical business issues that nobody wants to talk about, but they're the things that cause the greatest concern or greatest havoc, if you will, if you don't think about them. Any questions so far? Am I talking too fast? No? Okay. So, are you prepared? We're going to go through these. Each one is on a different slide in terms of the topic, but so we'll start off with, what the, sorry, the make a list. Sorry, I have new contacts in and it just went foggy for a second. So the make a list, that's kind of what we were just talking about, the make a list of what to do. So you're thinking about those things ahead of time. You know where your supplies are. You know, I heard somebody, you mentioned the evacuation route, right? Know where those evacuation locations are. Become familiar in the community. You want to be making a list of all the things you need to be thinking about before you actually create your plan and your list of supplies and all of those things. So have you guys gone through any kind of preparation like that? Have you thought about what you would do if something happened here? Anybody gone through that process at all?
I'm going through the thought process of some of it, I'm still working on it. I'm here.
How many of you live on the water? Okay. So there's different things you think about living on the water, right? When I moved here, I first moved to Keith Avenue, right here in town, and I now live in Whitestone. And at the time when I was looking, my mom was with me, and I saw places down at the end of Windmill Point, and I thought, wow, wouldn't that be great? And my mom was in her early 90s at the time. She's since passed away, but she was like, oh no, we're not living down here, because if you're off doing some kind of disaster thing, I'm stuck. Nobody can get through. You know, she saw driving past the water, so I was like, okay, Mom, got it. We ended up not moving down there. Now I live down in Whitestone off of Beach Road, still that's stuck in my head, right? That I'm not going any further down Windmill Point. But you kind of have to think through, though, what are the challenges that are going to occur, and if you are on the opposite side like that, where a road would flood, how prepared are you, right? Well, that's where it comes in, John, when you were talking about having supplies, right? You want to make sure you have enough supplies that for whatever the situation is. And typically, it used to be they tell you 24 hours, then it went to 36 hours and 48 hours. Now we talk about 72 hours. And again, it depends on whether you're sheltering in place, whether you're evacuating. So those are all the things that you want to think about in terms of that list. What do you need to do? Do you need to, so these are things that you do need to do, but are there other things that you need to do? You know, you need to have a communications plan. You need to have a checklist of everything. I put these up here as the things that you absolutely need to do, but there's also things that you personally may need to do. You know, you might have special situations, or maybe someone in your home that has health issues, or has oxygen, or you think about different things you need for pets, families with children, extended family, people that you may be responsible for outside your home. All of those things are what comes into play in terms of that list of, making a list to figure out what it is that you need to do in order to be prepared. And I guarantee you, there's always, every situation, they'll have a new thing and you might not have thought about it, but if you have gotten there to 90 to 95%, then whatever comes up that's unique, you're better prepared to handle it, because the stress of trying to figure it out all at once should be much less because you've gone through the process ahead of time. Any questions? So then the next thing, know I'm going to go this way. Sorry, it's the light flashing off my eyes for some reason. So know what the risks are. We talked a little bit about that in terms of the tornadoes or the different types of storms. There might be other types of risks in the community. So maybe not so much here, but there's a national framework of incidents, right? And there's 17 different incidents they list. And they have things on there like a cyber attack, but they also have bioterrorism. They have, a train derailment. You think about anything that could occur in the community. I don't know if you just were watching the news or heard about in Ohio where they had a chemical leak. And at first it was 4,000 miles and they had it ended up contained to a smaller area. You hear about train derailments. One of the things that we did here, I was working with a group on a business continuity plan, and we were talking about rail derailment. And they said, there's no rail. We know that, right? But if the rail does derail further north where there is rail, and it blocks off something for some reason, or trucks can't get here, it does impact grocery stores, food supply, all those things. So even if it's not right here, or like the bridges, right? We have two, well, the Maryland Bridge, but the Norris Bridge or up in Tappahannock, either one of those bridges, or both of those bridges will shut down, with all three actually going over to Maryland as well, if the wind is 40 miles an hour or more. So if you think about, you have an evacuation plan, but your evacuation is now because it's also windy, where do you go? No, and that's some of the things that these national level exercises, you may not, again, you may not be aware of it, but a few years ago they were doing a national level exercise. There's quite a few now. I think it was in 2018 that I was involved with. And they were actually talking about a hurricane coming up through Virginia Beach, all the way up in the implications to DC. And they looked at this area because if there was the bridges that were closed and if people needed to evacuate, what would they do? Or how far could they go? Or were there stopping points? Like those are all the types of things that the people in charge are thinking about. Sometimes they don't think about everything, which is also why you need to be thinking about everything. Yeah, not to the level of being overly hyper or concerned, but just enough to help, because tensions do rise when something happens, right? And so the more you think about these things ahead of time in a way that increases your own comfort level, or those around you, or the people that you could help, how do you get involved, which is why I mentioned CERT, right? If that's something that also helps you, get involved in an organization because you gain more knowledge and experience, and then you can help other people. There's another organization that I belong to. It's called IT Disaster Resource Center. ITDRC is 100% volunteer, and we go out and provide technology capabilities. So everything from, in a community, a charging station, if there's power that's out. There's trailers that have a number of different types of technology, so we can establish Starlinks, or we can establish network communications, and we do it for the community, so the churches or the fire department, or you hear about the disaster resource centers where people come and get water or food or whatever. And so an organization like that, you don't have to have extensive technology skills, because there's all sorts of things that you need, like logistics, when there's a disaster. So if you have an inkling to get involved, there's a number of other organizations, the big ones, Samaritan's Purse or Red Cross, or all of those, and you get all sorts of training, and it helps you think through for yourself then, again, bringing it back home, right? What do I need to do to be better prepared? So the next one is the identify local resources, which we talked about to a point, but some of the other local resources, like, do you know, if you're involved with your church, do you know what they do? A lot of my disasters were up in New England, a lot of ice storms and such. But I also, when you're in the emergency management or emergency response, everybody talks about their big disaster, right? And where did they, either it was a good disaster or a bad disaster. Obviously, all disasters are bad, but in terms of the organization and the resources and how communities come together, and then you come in and provide support, is part of how you feel about the disaster, in a sense. So I was deployed for Hurricane Ike back in 2008 for 30 days in Chambers County in Texas. And for those of you that don't know, Hurricane Ike hit Galveston. And it came through Galveston Bay. Well, Chambers County owned half of Galveston Bay. So it was complete devastation, things that I had never seen before. But one of the things that they had learned from as a community and as individuals was they had had Hurricane Wilma before that and a couple other hurricanes. So what they did as a community was pretty amazing. There's certain regulatory things, like FEMA cannot give private sector generators. They can give them to the county, and the county can then give them to whomever they want to give them to. So, and that's to make sure that it's government to government resource, right? And so because of what they had learned, the county, as part of their plan, they gave a generator to a gas station, because the gas station had gas, it didn't have power. right? And it's so they were able to continue to pump gas. The other thing that they did is they gave another generator to what was like a small diner. And that diner, you couldn't be open for customers, it was dangerous. But we, as the federal representatives were there, the state representatives, the locals, and so what they did is they opened up their diner every morning and fed us 3 meals a day. So as a local, they just came in, signed in. As a county, same thing. As a state, same thing. And then as a federal employee, I had to give them, $3 or $4 a meal because they don't get reimbursed for feeding the federal government the way they do. That's how the reimbursement goes in a disaster is you put all your expenses together and you submit it through FEMA's process and under what's called public assistance. And so that community learned who was willing to, the folks that owned that business, they would drive 50 miles or however they had to go get supplies. And we were there, I was there 30 days. The first 3 weeks was without power. So it was a challenge. And that was the great thing that individuals had learned. So one day I came in, they had in the courthouse where we were staying, on the bottom floor was the local people, on the main floor was the judge served as the emergency management director, so his chambers were the emergency operations center, and he was the only one that was on that floor sleeping, and then upstairs they had in the different courtrooms the state and federal employees. So I happened to be the only female of the federal team, and so I was by myself in a chamber, and I came in having been out around in the community, and there was a pillow sitting on the table. They had learned that they didn't have pillows the last time. They saw that I just had my, I was prepared. For me, I didn't think about pillow. I had, you have like a pad and then the sleeping bag and the stuff. To me, I was perfectly prepared, but like, you can't sleep without a pillow. Okay. So, you start looking at that, and why am I sharing that with you? Because that's part of the whole individual preparedness, right? It's all about individual people coming together. And so the people that could cook, brought food, the people that could check on other people. It's part of that too, and this whole know those local resources is part of, knowing your neighbors. And I think in some cases, in some communities, we know people less than we used to. Here, I think we do, it's sort of mixed, right, of how well you know your neighbors depending on where you live. So I strongly encourage doing some outreach, asking some questions. Obviously, the library has tremendous resources. One of them is, the programs like this, right? The county could, if they're doing any kind of exercises and you want to be involved in something like that. So those are all the types of things of knowing your resources. And then thinking about what are businesses going to do. And it's okay to ask them, what is the bank going to do if there's no power? It's a big concern, right? People think ATM, I can't get money. So, ask them what their plans are. And if they haven't thought about it, and you don't obviously do it in an aggressive way, but maybe they hadn't thought about that. Or maybe they had and hadn't realized how many people were concerned about that. Some of the things that I've seen in other locations, when there was more mail and less electronic mail, were notifications from, say, if there was a boil water requirement, and the businesses that sent out messages, they would include that, even though they weren't the ones providing the water, because it helped everybody. And so there's a lot of different ways in which communities can do things, and individuals can, like yourselves, can influence that. So that's really key to know those resources. Any questions or comments? Yes, Alice?
Yes. Question partly personally, but also, of course, from the library's perspective. So am I hearing that generally the coordination during an emergency comes at the county level here? And then that would be the central clearinghouse where things would be coordinated?
It would, yes, but if it happens within the town of Kilmarnock proper, there would also be town involvement, right? And so, but if, so just sort of think about it this way. If if you're looking at it in terms of disaster response, the disaster is local. So if it's within Kilmarnock and they can handle it, then the county, in our structure, obviously, we have the emergency EMS is countywide. So it's kind of an overlap. But then if you're looking at, the county has a plan, and the county is the one that would then reach out to the state if it's beyond county capabilities and say, hey, we need help. And then the state, if they were supporting the county, and it may be if it's something that's multiple counties wide or widespread, like a tornado like we talked about that came through, or a hurricane, that the state would look at their resources, figure out where to send them, and the states actually are divided into regions. The state is divided into regions, and so there's a regional coordinator that would reach out to Matt here in our county and say, hey, do you need any help? And if he says, no, we got it. If he says, yes, we do, they would send state resources. If it got to a point that the state had too many requirements, then that's when they would go to FEMA and say, hey, we need help. And in order to do that, the governor then has to have declared a state of emergency. And if the governor does not declare a state of emergency, FEMA cannot come in. And so the first step in that process is that the governor declares a state of emergency, and then the president, there's two different types of declarations. One is an emergency declaration, and that's what enables federal resources to come in ahead of time. And help support. So if they know there's a bigger event coming or they're planning for something like that. The presidential disaster declaration occurs after the incident when the amount of damage has been determined, and then it's decided by county. But at a town level, the town would submit whatever damage, say the town offices got damaged, any type of government facility within the town of Kilmarnock, and they would submit that to the county, for the county to then submit to the state, because there's a county threshold you have to hit on a public assistance level and also on an individual assistance level. And that's why you see sometimes people saying, FEMA's not here, we didn't get any help, but the county next door did. It's a process that's determined by, it's actually a congressional mandate, and it's determined by a per capita formula on an individual level. And then also on the public assistance, so that sometimes the county can get public assistance, but not individual assistance.
So the county EMS would be, for example, doing the messaging out to the citizens of the county, not FEMA.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's why you see, if you use Nextdoor, or you see on Facebook, or have you all, are any of you signed up for Code Red? So that's county driven, right? So Code Red, you go to the county of Lancaster, or if you're in Northumberland, every county, not every county, but a lot of counties have similar type of systems. So here in Lancaster, using Code Red, I also, because I was at Keith Avenue, I get them for both my Keith Avenue area and where I am now in Whitestone, and I don't know how to not do it. I haven't figured out how to unsubscribe. They have my address in there from before. So, but it's definitely sent out Code Red by the, whatever the county says, hey, we need to push this out.
So that would be this.
Yeah. And I actually don't know, Alice, whether the town, I'm trying to remember if when I lived in the town, they might have shared power outages when I lived on Keith Avenue, but I'm honestly, it's been a while and I don't know what the town does. They have a capability to do it, whether they use it or not, I'm not sure.
We have a message did go out most recently when the road paving improvement around where the drugstores are, when that was going to happen, they sent a message out.
So that would be the same kind of system, right? It can be used for, sometimes you see it for road closures, or if they know the work that was being done on Norris Bridge is driven by whoever's responsible for that communications. Any other questions? So the next thing is create a communications plan. How many of you have a communications plan? Anybody? Do you know what that looks like? So the key thing about the communications plan is who do you need to notify where you're going to go, right? And so, or if you have a family and you're in You know, you want to make sure that today, who knows whose phone number anymore, right? I call Alice, I don't know her phone number, but she's in my list. So you want to make sure in your communications plan that you actually have all those phone numbers, because if power goes out, you don't know your phone numbers, you're in trouble, right? And so it's also, if people are, you have an active family, people are all over the place within the community. Maybe someone's at school, someone's at work, someone's, you know, doing whatever. And you need to be able to have, what is that communications plan that says, in this situation, this is what we're gonna do. Or some recommendations, like if you use texting more than calling, you may want to decide in your communications plan that you have a code word that your family knows, so you know it's not someone, there's so much spam today, or text that you ignore. So you want to, it could also be the same word you use if you're calling and saying, you know, hey, this is Suzanne, and, you know, code word is Gypsy, that's what I've seen, right? So if I were texting someone, I would text Gypsy and then put the message of meet here at 5 o'clock. Or 2 o'clock, or whatever your plan is, but the communications part of it is to make sure that everybody that you need to get involved in your plan is notified. And also the other part is to make sure that you have someone outside of your impacted area on that communications chain, right? Because then they also know, God forbid something happens, they have information as to where you were going. Right, so if a tornado came through and we're missing persons, or you know, something like that, there's a way to know where people were going, and that's what's really key about that communications plan. The first most important thing is you have the phone numbers of everybody and the way in which that they need to be communicated with. That's, you know, sort of another change, right? Because now we use Messenger, we use text, we use email, we call, whatever. And so you want to make sure that you have in your communications plan who you need to communicate with, how best to reach them, and whatever those details are, their email, their phone number, whatever that is. And then also, you know, when you're giving that plan to someone outside, you want to give them the entire plan, so that if you're their primary point of contact, say it's a relative or a close friend or something, they may not know who all you would include in your circle. Maybe you take care of, you know, an elderly neighbor that you would include in your evacuation process, or, you know, so you want to let them know, that's part of that, again, critical part of the communications plan is for someone that's not here, they may not know what those relationships are. So you may want to have on there too, it's my mother-in-law, it's my, you know, babysitter, it's my whomever. My caregiver for my mother, or whatever. So as much information in that communications plan, and then the keeping it secure, you're not putting dates of birth or, you know, private information like that. It's literally, yes, your email or your phone is technically private, but that's not something that could, you don't want it to be secure with a password, because if somebody forgets the password, they can't get the list. So make it enough information, but not so much that you would be concerned if somebody got a hold of it, right? Does that make sense? Questions about that? Okay. So build a kit. There's a list over there of things to include. The biggest advice I have is think about what's important to you in the way of a kit. So you think about food and provisions like that, but also we mentioned earlier pets. If it's children, you have children involved. If you have, so for children, give them something to do, right? Coloring books, crayons, things that if their devices, for those that use them, have no power, they still have something to do. Same thing with adults, right? I have in my kit like a crossword puzzle or a word search thing, something on paper, Sudoku, because at some point in time, you're going to be stuck somewhere doing something, and doing something like that calms nerves, right? And you don't necessarily want it to be using it on your phone because don't have the same level of power, or maybe you have no power. So you think about a kit, what's, you know, reading, make sure you have flashlight. You make sure you have extra batteries, you know, whatever it is that is, maybe it's a knitting thing, right? Because you could go somewhere if you're go to a shelter or something, you have what your most comfortable things you can bring with you that aren't huge, right? So think about that. The foods that you like, you know, there's obviously non-perishable foods, water. Again, that depends. There's varying um, ideas about how much water you need, but a lot of times, like if you have enough in your car to get where you're going and you're going someplace, one of the first things that they have is water. So you don't want to fill up your entire car with water. You want to make sure that you have other things in your car, enough water to survive for 3 or 4 days, and then know that wherever you're going to, they're going to end up having water, either through distribution. That's one of the things that goes most to waste. That it doesn't feel like it at the time of disaster, but it sits there because at some point people don't need water anymore, so it just sits at these distribution sites. You know, you think about other things. I mentioned that I have director's chair in my car. I actually had 2 of them in case somebody is with me. There's always 2, or if somebody comes along to help, or you find someone that needs help, right? So kind of think about that. I have a blanket, I have travel pillow, a little rain type thing, the stuff that I learned from being a reservist with FEMA. You basically live out of your car, whether it's a rental car and in some faraway place, you end up, you know, one of the first things you try and do is go to a location and buy supplies so that if you need them or you come across other people that need them. So if you're thinking about your kit, maybe look at, do you know, again, knowing your neighbors, right? Is there someone that may not have thought about that? Or is there someone that might ask you for help? So if you can, you know, have something extra to help someone else. Again, not everybody's in the situation that they can do that. Sometimes it ends up a bartering situation, right? You know, I have rice and you have beans, let's put them together, and now we have rice and beans. And it makes more food. So while the lists over there, I highly encourage you to take a look at those, but most importantly, personalize it, because that's really what it comes down to. Your medications that you need. Make sure you have paper copies of a prescription. Because again, if you're not here, or if you are here in the pharmacy, the power's out, and you need a prescription, they can access it. If you have a paper copy of it, including eyeglass prescription, right? Make sure that you go someplace else, and if something happens, you have those things that you need in order to be able to fill prescriptions. And there's a lot of work that's been done over the years around, I think it's called Health RX now, but a lot of the pharmacies got together, and probably 15 years ago or more, you couldn't change prescriptions from from a Walmart to a CVS. And some of that changed only during disaster time. Now you can do it, you know, more regularly because of electronic transfer of prescriptions. And some of those actually came because the technology advanced, but it also came out of lessons learned from disasters. You know, so think about things that are creature comforts in your home. Look around, what do you use, or maybe you only use once in a while, but if you weren't there, you need to take it with you. That's another thing. I use like plastic tubs like you use for storage, and if you put food in that and you have another one with your extra socks or changed clothes or gloves or whatever, you know, minor cleaning supplies. And a lot of that, you know, the resources that came out recommended during COVID helped during a disaster, right? So having wipes, having extra roll of toilet paper in your kit, because if you go someplace and it's out of toilet paper, you have toilet paper, if you have to stop somewhere, right? So I always bring extra grocery bags. I have them sitting in my car anyway, so if something happens, and I don't have 6 months of food, and I don't have a basement, but I don't have 6 months of food in my house anywhere. I don't go crazy about this stuff, but I think about if something were to happen, you know, I've got a cabinet of cans, right? And so which of those cans have the flip tops? What else do I need? You need a can opener, right? So start thinking about those things. Some have been made more convenient, some have not. Always make sure you have things like sandwich bags or quart, and make sure that they are the freezer ones, not just the regular ones, because you might need to leave something in it longer. So having it as a freezer bag rather than a regular plastic bag is helpful. I don't think that level of detail is probably on the list over there, so just some tips, things to think about. Any questions about anything? Yes, ma'am.
I think it's a good idea to now both a go kit and a home kit.
Yes. So, and actually, so the go kit that you can easily take with you, a home kit, if you're shelter in place, you have things that are reserved or preserved, right? And then also a small cart, like I talked about the things that I have in my car, in case I'm somewhere and I have to go somewhere else and I can't get home to get my go kit, right? So you want stuff in your car that gives you enough to get somewhere else, right? And then it's also recommended if you're at an office to have a small kit in your office, because if something happens there, you take your bag and it becomes your go kit in your car, right? So absolutely. And it might be different items, but the things that you want to make sure you have in every single one of those is like your paper prescriptions and your phone numbers, the things that you can't buy if you go somewhere else. Good question. All right, so test your plan. How would you test your plan? Alice and John, what would you guys do if you had to test your plan? What's that?
Get a bunch of fans and simulate a storm.
There you go, get a bunch of fans and simulate a storm. You get Esther involved,
Yes.
right? So you get, you could make it an event, right? Hey, let's come over and test our plans, like see if, better thinking together, right? If it's a neighborhood issue and we're gonna be helping each other, what has somebody else thought about that you have? Or, that kind of thing, right? If it's you on your own, look at your communications list. Who all is on that communications plan? And say, hey, let's check this out. Make sure that the phone numbers that we have or the emails we have are accurate. Or is there someone we missed? Maybe, someone on your list has someone else that they take care of. That should be in your master communications plan. You may not figure that out if they didn't say, hey, you forgot Suzanne. Oh yeah, gotta add Suzanne, right? The world needs lots of Suzannes, right, Suzanne? I found out her name is Suzanne too, also.
And Susie.
That's Susie. Are you a Suzanne? Oh, you're Susie. Are you a Suzanne also?
Yeah.
There you go. Look at, what are the odds of 3 Suzannes? Now, if you put Suzanne on the list, we should have, pardon? Oh, Susanna, okay. Well, you still have to go with Suzanne and Suzanne. We have to make sure we have which Suzanne is it, right? And what's the right phone number? You want to test that, because if you get them swapped and I'm trying to call myself, well, that wouldn't work so well. But, so you think about the testing of your plan, looking at my plan is to evacuate, to go to, this route to friends in Richmond. And under what circumstances would that cause an issue? So you want to be thinking about that. If the the bridge up in Tappahannock is closed for some reason, and you use that as your scenario in testing your plan, what would we do if we're halfway there and they shut down the road that way? What would be the alternative? Where would we go? Things like that, and you don't have to actually drive up there and make it up. Although I like your fan idea, John. When you decide to do that, I'm coming over. And we'll get Esther. So, other ways to test your plan, looking at, again, at that checklist to make sure if your plan is to, see what your church is doing. Find out from the church, are they going to open a shelter? Sometimes so the question Alice asked about whose responsibility, counties have plans, right? Some part of it is tied to funding. Sometimes counties put their emergency response plan on their website. Other counties don't. It used to be mandated that you had to, and then somewhere along the way, people realized that that's probably not the best idea because someone wanting to take that plan and for nefarious purposes would have the complete response. So not every county does that. A lot of lessons we've learned since 2001. Whether, from 9/11, from Katrina, from a series of close hurricanes in a row down in Texas. Every time something happens, we learn something, right? And so, or we should, or something, there's a whole, in the industry of you build a plan and then when the incident happens, you throw out the plan because it's nothing like what you planned for. And that's why it's good to test your own plan because you at least have thought through the things that you're pretty sure of. Because something might change your plan, but you've got the basics down, right? Other ways to test the plan, like I was starting to say, if you're involved in your church, see if they have a plan or if they'd be willing to host something like that. In county plans, they have to identify the shelters so people know where to go and then they put that information out. But what we saw, like this is talking about being down in Texas, there were certain designated shelters. But what people did is they went where they were comfortable. They went to their churches, and so the churches became spontaneous shelters. And they opened up their doors so people could stay there. So you might want to even check something like that. There may be, the elementary school here, or is it the middle school or the elementary school that is the,
Right now,
that's where the shelter is?
yes.
So, it could be that one of the churches decides, hey, we could have people come here instead, or in addition to. So that's part of also testing your plan is to make sure things kind of change, or if there's new resources, remember know your resources, new resources pop up, you might want to modify your plan. All right, so last but not least, always be ready. What does that mean? What do you think of when I say always be ready?
It can happen.
It can happen, right? What else?
Have your road kits ready, your home and your car.
And your relationships with your people, right? Outside of the area of people you haven't talked to in a while. What happens when somebody sees something on the news? They give you, hey, are you okay? You might not have talked to them in a while, but they see something and they know you live there, and suddenly everybody's blowing up your phone or texting or whatever and saying, hey, are you okay? So some of the things that I tend to do is if I know there's something that's happened where people know I am, is I will post on Facebook, I'm here, I'm fine, some message, or to certain people. Not that it's all about you always, but you have those people that are regularly communicating with you. They may not be part of your communications plan, but they will most certainly be the ones looking for you. So that's something, a good idea to think about. How do I communicate with other people that wouldn't be part of my communications plan, and what level of information do you want to give? Probably not a lot, because it's nobody's business in a way except who you choose to communicate with. But you might, Facebook has the thing of you can check in that you're safe, and they automatically, like if any one of these hurricanes, I don't do that because there's too many people there that I have no idea who they are, and they don't need to know I'm safe. But I do use my Facebook page to communicate. Or, there's something that's going on in another area, I tend to share it on my Facebook page because I know people in different locations. And so that's another thing is how you can also be ready, because it gives you a heightened sense of awareness, but it also gives you a heightened sense of security that you're doing what you can when the impossible does happen, right? And I think that that's probably the biggest thing. I got into really business continuity before they called it that, right? Back in the early 80s, I worked for a law firm and I was responsible for implementing a phone system. And so we had to make sure that the phone system was always up and running because lawyers use the phones, and if phones weren't working, they couldn't bill. Business continuity problem, right? And so, but it wasn't called that. It wasn't called business continuity until 9/11, really, when it suddenly, obviously the devastation and the impact on our country, but from a business perspective, it was how do you keep going when something like the unthinkable happens, right? In certain cases, there were business that lost almost all of their employees. In my town, it was close to home. I knew people that were in the World Trade Center, and I knew people that were on a plane, and so, it changes your perspective without making me hypersensitive, but it's just knowing that the things happen, right? There's no earthquakes here, and then there's an earthquake. Why? Because something shifted underneath that we had no idea about. So you just want to be in a state of ready without being in a state of panic. And then help others. Your sense of calm, so I use my sense of humor. Alice and John will tell you, probably more than anything else, that's my secret weapon. Because sometimes the stuff that I'm involved with or I see or I know about is stuff that I don't want to, but I have to. Not have to, I've chosen to. Right? So, if you're one of those people that is a person that tends to help people, you also have to make sure you help yourself. And that you think about what your limits are. Because if you hit those limits and you haven't refueled your own batteries, you're no help to anyone else. So I don't know where I am on time, but that's all I've got.
You're perfect.
Okay, good. Any questions? Any comments? What do you guys think? Did you learn anything?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very good. It's a good starting of a pot. So thinking about things.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Where were you?
I'm from Westport, and so that's where I was at the time, and then I moved up to Madison.
No, I'm just curious because I spent a number of years in Westport, Rhode Island.
Oh, sure. So Madison was up at that end of the state. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's, so when I moved up to that end of the state where Madison is closer to Rhode Island, and there was much, because Long Island down in Westport had more barriers, but once you moved further up, there was much difference in how storms hit.
Things get wiped out.
Yes, absolutely.
Literally.
And a lot of the flooding, right, because the low-lying areas, and that had nothing to do with climate change or anything. It's just the fact that when you get so much rain, one more quick thing, I was telling you about being a female reservist. I was due to go to Hurricane Katrina just by the time of when I became a reservist, and I became a reservist because I was involved in a national level exercise that I talked about. So my focus was anti-terrorism stuff, or responding to those type of incidents, or protecting against them. And so by becoming a reservist, and at the time they recruited you, so it wasn't a process like you apply for USA jobs, right? So I had been asked to become this external affairs person, had applied, was ready to go. Katrina hit on that Monday. Friday, I was asking about, is there anything we can do as private sector, because we were trying to help. By Sunday, and I happened to mention, I'm like, hey, what about my appointment? Not realizing that I'd only turned the paperwork in about a week before, like August 17th, literally. So here we are, and the storm comes, and by Sunday, I had my appointment. It took about 30 days to get my government credit card. I was packed and ready to go south. I got an email from FEMA headquarters that literally said, Suzanne, change the plans, you're going to New Hampshire. And I was probably the only FEMA employee up in New England at that point because of the storm. But the reason was they had a storm that hit 16 inches of rain in 24 hours. And it hit in New Hampshire where there was a river, and the water took a gas station, tore it away from the side of the river. It hit this bridge, the bridge collapsed, and it sent a tidal wave, football size tidal wave of water through this little town that just got devastated. So again, who would have thought, right? Everything looks so pretty, and all of a sudden, bam. And I can tell you that being my first time seeing and growing up in New England, between Connecticut and Northern Virginia, I spent a lot of time in Connecticut and up in New England in summers, further up, and the devastation that nature can do. You read about it when you're in school, right? And all of a sudden you're living it, and it's mind-boggling. So with that, again, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.